Franklin Wilson's hands glided skillfully over the oak, sensing each contour and depression through years' hardened fingertips that had mastered Wood's dialect since their early youth. Morning sunlight poured in through dusty workshop windows, highlighting flecks above his workbench. The aroma of coffee intertwined with lemon oil and fresh sawdust filled the air as he finished the last dovetail joint on a bespoke cabinet for the Hendersons' anniversary. A radio softly echoed in the background, playing Glenn Miller, a favorite of Franklin's father. He nearly let the phone ring to voicemail. It was an invention he had learned to tolerate rather than cherish. Like many modern devices, his nephew Derek insisted it was essential for their hardware store. Before responding, Franklin wiped his hands on the shop rag attached to his belt. "Franklin," his nephew's voice sounded too hurried and polished for a Thursday morning. "We must discuss these quarterly reports. You should examine some inconsistencies prior to tomorrow's board gathering," Derek's tone suggested. For 43 years at Wilson's Hardware, discrepancies had not usually been positive. Franklin carefully straightened his navy silk tie in the hallway mirror, adjusting it against his well-pressed white shirt. Mara had gifted this tie on their 35th anniversary, commenting that the color accentuated his eyes. He'd donned it at every crucial meeting since. "You appear composed," Mara remarked from the kitchen doorway, cradling a coffee cup. "The board respects logic. They usually do." Franklin acknowledged her words, observing she maintained a certain distance this morning. Typically, she would adjust his tie, neaten his collar. These minor acts had evolved into their daily ritual during 40 years of marriage. "Derek's inexperienced," Mara added, setting down her cup. "He lacks the business history understanding you possess." He grasps spreadsheets and profit margins competently, sometimes excessively, Franklin responded, grabbing his briefcase. "Change isn't inherently negative, Franklin." His wife's tone caused him to pause. He scrutinized her face, still attractive at 61 despite the deeper lines of concern around her eyes recently. Or was it something else he saw in her today? "I should be on my way. I wouldn't want to miss my own trial," he joked awkwardly, but his attempt at humor fell short between them. As he drove the truck out of the driveway, he looked back at the house. Through the kitchen window, he could see Mara already on the phone, her back to the window. He couldn't recall when she last waved goodbye. The Wilson Hardware boardroom seemed different today. Franklin noticed it upon entering. The polished cherry table shimmered under the recessed lighting, but the chairs were occupied. Derek sat at the head of the table in Franklin's usual seat. Mara sat next to him, offering a constrained smile that didn't reach her eyes. It seemed the meeting had commenced without his presence. "Ah, Uncle Franklin," Derek greeted, his voice echoing the sheen of his MBA education from State University. "We were merely discussing the quarterly projections. Do take a seat." The only vacant chair was at the distant end of the table. Franklin felt a warm flush creep up as he seated himself, acknowledging Bill Jameson and Tom Peterson, board members for 2 decades. They barely acknowledged him in return. "To continue," Derek resumed, navigating through slides on his tablet that illuminated the wall, "our digital transformation project has pinpointed substantial inefficiencies within our existing operation system. The traditional family business model was effective, but in today's cutthroat marketplace, we require adaptability and foresight." Franklin attentively heard as his nephew dismantled 4 decades of business ideology using PowerPoint slides and dynamic graphs. Mara frequently nodded during her examination of materials Derek had meticulously arranged, her reading glasses resting on her nose. "The figures don't deceive," Derek declared, transitioning to a slide that emphasized dropping profits in red for 3 consecutive quarters within the custom woodworking section. The traditional craftsmanship was undeniably valuable, but it appeared less profitable in contemporary retail. Franklin coughed discreetly. "Those bespoke items draw customers into the store. They always have. Regardless of when my father started that service," Derek interjected politely, "this isn't 1952. The board has discussed and preliminarily voted on a restructuring plan." Franklin felt his stomach knot up. "Preliminary vote? I wasn't informed about the scheduling of such a vote." An awkward hush settled over the room. Tom Peterson fiddled with his coffee cup, while Bill Jamison rearranged some papers. Franklin turned to Mara, who continued scrutinizing papers. After a while, she raised her gaze, maintaining a professional demeanor. Mara, Franklin said, I've gone over the financials thoroughly with Derek. The company requires this shift. The board has decided on a leadership reorganization, with Derek becoming CEO and you moving to an advisory position. These words struck him forcefully, not just their substance, but also her rehearsed delivery. Clearly, she had been aware of this development. It was prearranged. An advisory role, Franklin echoed, keeping his voice even though he could hear a roar in his ears. In the business my grandfather founded, that my father protected during the recession, that I've managed for 43 years. Derek interjected with an attractive remuneration package as he pushed a folder toward Franklin. Your efforts have been priceless, Uncle Franklin, but it's time to focus on what lies ahead. Franklin didn't take the folder. Instead, he surveyed the table filled with faces of individuals he regarded as friends and associates. None returned his gaze except Derek, whose expression harbored an undertone of victory beneath a guise of professional worry. I understand. Franklin rose from his seat at a leisurely pace, fastening his suit jacket. If I might be excused, I require some moments to myself. He exited with an unyielding posture, aware of the gazes directed at him, yet unaffected by their urgency. The hallway to his temporary office seemed extended compared to this morning. Martha, his longtime secretary, cast a worried look upon his passage. The comprehension in her eyes indicated she was already informed. In small businesses, gossip spreads swiftly. Within the confines of his office, Franklin locked the door behind him and stood motionless. The family photos on the credenza, the worn-out leather chair his father had sat on, the vista of Main Street, all appeared transient, as if they were on loan. He retrieved his handkerchief from his breast pocket, a neatly pressed white square. With careful precision, he unraveled it, then folded it back into pristine quarters before replacing it. His father had instilled in him that a man's handkerchief should mirror the orderliness of his mind. At that moment, it was the only thing he could manage. A gentle tap sounded at the door, and Martha walked in without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes bore red rims, but her bearing remained as proper as ever. Mr. Wilson, I've readied a box for your personal belongings, she said, maintaining a steady voice despite the emotions lurking in her gaze. Whenever you are ready. Franklin nodded, observing as she set a cardboard box on his desk, where it had stood for 4 decades. Thank you, Martha, she hesitated near the door. Are there more tasks to complete, Mr. Wilson? Franklin adjusted his tie and squared his shoulders, far from finished. In the afternoon, Franklin found himself in Wilson's hardware showroom, where Derek was addressing the gathered workers. The fluorescent light seemed more oppressive than he had recalled, creating harsh shadows that marred faces he recognized from years, even decades past. Thus, we express our gratitude to Franklin for his long years of loyal service, Derek spoke, his hand resting loosely on the counter where Franklin's father had once tallied purchases with a pencil and paper. His wisdom has steered us here, and now we gaze ahead with anticipation and hope. A tentative round of applause echoed. Franklin clutched a carton filled with his personal belongings, his father's fountain pen, family photographs, the wooden ruler his grandfather had utilized to measure cuts for the initial store shelving. He offered a brief nod to the employees, some appearing genuinely troubled, others maintaining guarded expressions. I value your heartfelt comments, Franklin stated, his tone even. The crafting of Wilson's hardware has been my life's endeavor. I hope you'll all carry on serving our community with the same devotion and ethics we have upheld for 3 generations. Derek moved closer, offering the symbolic key transfer. Franklin took them, then returned all but his personal house key to Derek, feeling the keys slip from his grasp like little anchors being severed. The updated inventories and contractual agreements are stored where they've always been, Franklin said. Martha is familiar with the system. Derek kept smiling. I'm confident we can handle it. Modern technology facilitates such transitions more efficiently today. As the brief ceremony ended, employees returned to their workstations. Franklin spotted Jamie, who began as a stock boy 15 years ago, standing at the paint counter with an indiscernible expression. Mara lingered near the exit, glancing at her watch. She has to depart immediately, as there is a women's auxiliary meeting at 3 p.m. On a Thursday? Questioned Franklin, knowing the auxiliary usually convenes on Tuesdays. It's a special planning session, she responded promptly. I'll look forward to seeing you at home for dinner. Franklin observed her departure, and the sound of her heels against the tile floor echoed decisively. He was about to reach his truck when he heard footsteps following him. The night security guard, James Taylor, briskly traversed the parking lot. "Mr. Wilson," he called, casting a glance towards the store before addressing Franklin. "Have a moment?" Franklin replied from within his truck. "What's on your mind, James?" "Merely to express my apologies for everything that's transpiring. It seems unfair, considering all you've done." James softened his voice. "There have been some peculiar late-night comings and goings. Your nephew has been working late most nights, bringing in people I've never encountered before." Indeed, Franklin stood still beside his truck, now intrigued. "Yes, sir." James hesitated. "Our service entrance camera has been malfunctioning for around 2 weeks now. Derek mentioned he'd arrange a repair, but it seems he keeps forgetting." Franklin scrutinized the older man's face. Having worked security at Wilson's for 12 years post-retirement from the police force, James was known for his meticulous attention to detail. "What time does your shift start tonight, James?" 10 to 6, as usual, James replied. Franklin nodded slowly. "I might have left some personal belongings in my office and might need to retrieve them after hours." "That wouldn't be unusual," James responded calmly. "The service entrance door often sticks unless you know the right way to wiggle the handle. Around 10:30 to 11 would be a good time to attempt opening it." The hardware store felt eerie in the dark. Familiar shapes morphed into foreboding shadows. Franklin navigated through the rear corridors with the assurance of someone who had traversed these paths for years. The service entrance was as James had detailed, requiring specific pressure above the handle for it to open. Derek's main office, now Franklin's domain, was found unsecured. Franklin wasn't taken aback. His nephew's lax approach to security was well known, relying heavily on cameras and alarms. Franklin employed his flashlight, maintaining the light low and concentrated, shying away from windows that might reveal the beam from outside. He moved directly towards the filing cabinets, recalling which drawers housed vital records. Although digital systems were Derek's preference, Franklin had persistently demanded paper backups of crucial documents, citing his mantra, "Systems fail, paper doesn't." In less than 20 minutes, Franklin meticulously examined the files, cross-checking numbers from the hard copy quarterly reports against his own understanding of the business. Invoices from vendors overstated, write-offs in inventory not corresponding with actual losses, expenditures for consulting services with unclear descriptions. He captured vital documents using his phone, operating stealthily and diligently. Upon reaching the third drawer, he discovered what he had suspected might be there: a distinct folder of interactions with Midwest Retail Development, a retail chain long interested in acquiring Wilson's hardware. Franklin was so engrossed in the documents that he almost failed to hear a faint noise. Turning around, he saw James standing in the doorway. "Did you find what you sought?" James asked softly. "More than I anticipated," Franklin replied, displaying the acquisition proposal. "It seems they're selling the business, the family business." James sighed. "I'm not surprised. Your nephew has extravagant preferences." "There's one more thing I need to verify," Franklin said, heading towards Derek's desk. In a contemporary design of glass and chrome, contrasting with the traditional oak desk he had used for years, lay the object of current scrutiny. Meticulously sorting through each drawer, Franklin found nothing out of the ordinary until reaching the bottom right compartment, hidden beneath trade publications. Inside was a compact leather portfolio. Its contents were hotel receipts from the Lakeview Inn on the town's edge, revealing frequent midweek stays for the past 6 months. The name Derek Wilson adorned these receipts, but the room charges showed meals and drinks for 2 people. While Franklin could have easily dismissed this fact under normal circumstances, it was a handwritten note sandwiched between 2 receipts that caught his attention. Same time Wednesday. Don't call the house. The distinctive handwriting belonged to Mara. As Franklin gazed at the note, his mind stubbornly avoided drawing the obvious conclusion, yet his heart had already grasped the truth. His actions now fueled by a chilling, detached resolve, he continued his search. In the drawer's recess, he discovered a USB drive labeled WH Transfer. He pocketed it as James reappeared at the doorway. 5 minutes before my tour of this floor, James warned, implying he should hurry. Franklin acknowledged with a nod, collecting the items he'd uncovered. James, I appreciate your— James interrupted. No need for thanks. He added solemnly, some things aren't right. Franklin recalled his father's struggles with prejudiced suppliers and customers regarding hiring practices in Wilson's. Good night, James, he said. Good night, Mr. Wilson. Be careful with what you found there. James warned. Those who cheat in business often cheat elsewhere as well. As Franklin exited through the service exit, those words lingered in his thoughts. The hotel receipts felt like they were piercing his pocket, nestled close to the USB drive, potentially holding crucial puzzle pieces. He strolled to his truck, 3 blocks distant to dodge notice. The night breeze carried the scent of impending rain, and a train's solitary whistle echoed through the night, cutting through the darkness. Franklin drove home with the radio muted, his thoughts buzzing enough already. In his home office, the bright computer screen clashed with the pre-dawn gloom. Outside, birds just starting to awaken sang timidly, their melodies a sharp contrast to the quiet within the house. Hours earlier, his coffee had grown cold, overshadowed by his meticulous examination of the USB drive's contents. There was no room for uncertainty about what he discovered. Financial forecasts for Wilson's hardware sale to Midwest retail development, legal papers ready for signing, and most alarmingly, a folder filled with scanned documents bearing what seemed like Franklin's authorization for dubious financial dealings transactions he was certain he hadn't approved. Franklin scrutinized one of the signatures closely, extremely close, but the loop on the F was incorrect. Someone had falsified his signature on papers that, if genuine, could implicate him in financial misconduct. The truth struck him with tangible force. This wasn't just a corporate takeover or familial deception. This could be criminal. He printed crucial documents, organized them, and shut the computer down. The eastern sky was slowly brightening, a thin strip of gray pushing away the darkness. He heard Mara stirring in the kitchen, familiar sounds of their daily routine coffee brewing, cabinets opening and closing, the click of the toaster lever. For 4 decades, those sounds brought him solace. Now, they seemed like the automated actions of an outsider. Franklin straightened his posture and advanced towards the kitchen. Mara was at the counter, facing away from him, preparing her customary breakfast of toast and fruit. She wore a robe he had gifted her during Christmas, her hair unkempt from sleep. You were awake the entire night, she stated without looking back. Not a question, I was. Franklin deposited the folder onto the kitchen table. We need to discuss this, Mara. She turned then, holding a coffee mug, her countenance artfully indifferent. What's the topic? He disclosed the hotel receipts first from the folder. And these? The fabricated documents followed. And that? Finally, the note in her handwriting was revealed. Mara retained her impressive composure as she perused the evidence spread out before her. Only the paleness of her knuckles on the coffee mug hinted at any response. You searched Derek's office, she eventually remarked. That's your reaction, not a denial. You're merely making accusations, Franklin, she retorted, placing the mug gently. Yes, Derek and I have been in a relationship, yes. We've planned changes for the business changes that should have taken place years ago due to your obstinacy. Her words landed like punches on him, but he maintained a composed expression. For how long? Does it matter to you? She continued. Yes, it does, she replied, sounding more exasperated than regretful. 2 years. But if you're asking about the duration of my dissatisfaction, it stretches back much further. 2 years, he echoed. And the business sale, the forged documents, she inquired. The business needs to be sold. You refused to consider it while in charge, so decisions had to be made, she said, folding her arms. As for the documents, Derek was responsible for that, not me. He claimed it was necessary to resolve some regulatory issues before the sale. Resolved? He queried. You suggest altering documents and counterfeiting my signature. Franklin kept his voice calm, though a vein throbbed at his temple. You realize that's fraud, Mara. It's not just illegal, it's criminal. She looked at him with what seemed like pity. You've always been preoccupied with your father's legacy, with tradition. The world has moved on while you stood still. Franklin scrutinized the woman in front of him, searching for a connection between this cold, calculating person and the young teacher he married 40 years ago, the one who mourned his father with him, who expanded the business in the 80s, who nursed him during pneumonia 10 winters ago. Was any of it genuine? He asked softly. For the first time, Mara's composure wavered slightly. There were aspects of truth initially. But you have to understand, Franklin, I was 22 when we married. Year after year, I longed to escape this town, to explore beyond its familiar streets and faces. You pledged we'd voyage when the business flourished. Yet, there was always another excuse to remain, another task, another obligation. So you formed a bond with my nephew. Meanwhile, I found solace in someone who yearned for more than our shared life. This, she gestured at the kitchen, the home, our life together, is all that Derek aspires. He harbors ambition, aspirations, a future free from the scent of sawdust and wood stain. Franklin remained motionless, each word striking him like a tangible blow. 40 years of marriage, now condensed into disdain for sawdust on his attire, a yearning unaligned with mine. I'll depart within the hour, he declared at last. My lawyer will reach out to you regarding the divorce. Don't act hastily, Franklin. We can address this rationally. The house? Our funds? At present, I'm hardly feeling rational, Mara. Franklin shut the folder and lifted it. I placed my trust in you, with my life, with our shared legacy. Yet, you deceived and betrayed us both. He ascended the stairs, retrieved a suitcase from the closet, and systematically packed. Clothes for a week, personal items, his father's watch, his mother's Bible. From below, he heard Mara on the phone, her voice hushed and anxious. Upon returning, she was stationed near the door. This action is unnecessary, Franklin. Remain in the guest room until we rectify the situation. There's nothing to rectify, he replied, halting at the door, casting one last look at the home they had shared for close to 4 decades. It's ironic. I could have pardoned a fleeting infidelity born of loneliness or introspection. But this wasn't that. This was deliberate, prefabricated. You and Derek schemed not just against me, but against everything my family stood for. Our family, or rather, your family, it was never ours, wasn't it? Franklin fixed his gaze on her for a prolonged moment. Goodbye, Mara, he said as he filled his truck with sunlight-bathed day. Unfamiliar, the weight of his wedding ring on his finger felt now. Removing it, he left it on the dashboard before driving away, departing from the residence that housed him as a married man. A motel by the roadside, its weathered sign and broken parking lot whispered of past glory days. Franklin's room was neat yet sparse. A bed, a laminate wardrobe, a small table with 2 chairs, and an unlit TV. He settled in one of the chairs, gazing at papers scattered on the tabletop. Night had arrived outside, rain rhythmically tapping on the window with growing vigor. Through phone calls to his banker, to a lawyer, to the county records office, he painted a bleaker picture than he'd initially anticipated. For several months, Derek had meticulously readied the business for sale, altering records and crafting evidence that implicated Franklin in dubious activities while maintaining his own innocence. On the other hand, Mara had withdrawn substantial sums from their shared accounts during the last year, presumably readying herself to depart. Franklin, slouched in his chair, felt the weight of an unusual quietude in the room. For the first time in 4 decades, he realized he was truly on his own, no business to manage, no wife at home, no defined future. He unconsciously fiddled with the radio dial on the bedside clock, a habit when his thoughts became too overwhelming. The static transformed into music, then speech, then more static as he skimmed through the frequencies. On the verge of surrendering, a familiar voice halted his hand. "In business and life, integrity are indivisible," the voice echoed. "The importance of a man's word carries weight. If it lacks significance, nothing else he constructs will endure." Franklin gazed at the radio in astonishment, recognizing his father's voice from an old interview on the local station's Business Leaders series dating back to the 70s. They seemed to be airing it as part of a retrospective. Wilson's hardware was not constructed through deceptive accounting or sleek sales strategies, continued his father's voice, roughened by age and recording distortions. It was built on trust. When a man approaches us for tools or materials, he is placing his faith in us, potentially entrusting us with his very livelihood. This trust transcends any temporary profit. Franklin remained motionless, absorbing the wisdom of a man who has been gone for 30 years. Despite facing challenges such as the recession of the early 80s, encroaching big box competitors, and the transition from manufacturing to service economy, he managed to overcome all obstacles without sacrificing the fundamental values of the business. "The records speak truth," his father stated. "That was my father's wisdom, a lesson I've passed on. Maintain accurate books, deal honestly with others, and your integrity surpasses any deceit." As the conversation concluded and morphed into music, Franklin remained still, his father's words reverberating within him. "The records speak truth." In an era of digital tampering and falsified data, maybe the traditional methods retained their strength. He glanced at the disorganized papers, viewing them with renewed insight. He'd lost because he'd adhered to old principles while Derek rewrote the rules. However, perhaps these original principles, the genuine ones, possessed potency if utilized skillfully. Franklin sat up straighter in his chair and started organizing the documents neatly. The melancholy that had shrouded him all day began to lift, making way for something calmer and more determined. His father's voice brought back a vital truth. Derek's lifetime of honest dealings had solidified a reputation that he couldn't fraudulently alter or seize. He grabbed his phone and decided to visit someone the next day, someone who could comprehend his predicament due to sharing a similar past struggle decades ago. The Pine Hills retirement community nestled on the town's north side, its red brick buildings and well-tended gardens resembling a miniature college campus rather than a home for the elderly. Franklin remained in his truck, observing residents stroll along walking paths or sit on benches basking in the morning sunlight. His hand lay on a folder of documents on the passenger seat, but he didn't intend to retrieve it yet. What was he doing here? Cal Turner, now 82 and retired from banking, wasn't a close friend. They shared only mutual esteem. But Franklin could only think of Cal as someone who might genuinely comprehend his predicament, offering insights beyond empty words or legal solutions. After exiting the truck, he approached the main entrance, nodding to an elderly woman gardening by the path. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. "Looking for someone?" Franklin replied. "Cal Turner, if he's available." "Oh, Cal's usually open to company." "Building C, apartment 307. Tell him Doris mentioned a chess rematch on Thursday still stands." The lobby was inviting and warm, lacking the sterile atmosphere Franklin had anticipated. A young receptionist guided him to Building C, and soon he stood hesitant before apartment 307, questioning his sudden visit. Before knocking, the door opened, revealing Cal Turner in pressed khakis and a blue button-down shirt, his white hair well-groomed. "I believed I heard someone outside," Cal stated, his tone as robust as Franklin recollected. "Franklin Wilson, quite unexpected." "I hope I'm not interrupting you, Cal," replied Franklin. "Absolutely not. I was merely preparing some coffee." "Please come in," Cal invited. Cal's apartment, although compact, was cozy with a small living area, a kitchenette, and a presumed bedroom door. The workshop set up in one corner, equipped with a small workbench, meticulously organized tools, a vise, and an apparent clock mechanism at various repair stages, caught Franklin's attention. "It seems you're still keeping yourself occupied with your hands," Franklin observed. "It keeps my mind active as well," Cal responded, spooning coffee grounds into a filter. Clocks make suitable companions. They don't chat, but they can share a wealth of knowledge if you listen. He indicated an armchair. Feel free to sit down. You appear to have a burden on your mind. Uncertain as to how to initiate the conversation, Franklin sat down. Cal had made the coffee and sat down, taking care not to disturb the other seat. I've learned about the incident at the hardware store, he began, sparing Franklin the effort of explanation. In small towns, news spreads rapidly. He asked, "What was it precisely you heard?" Cal continued, "There were whispers that your nephew masterminded a boardroom takeover with your wife's consent, planning to sell the business to one of those regional conglomerates." Cal's gaze was unyielding, devoid of sympathy but filled with understanding. Franklin nodded gratefully for Cal's discretion. "Essentially, that's it," he clarified. "However, there are additional details. Derek has been manipulating financial records, forging your signature on documents, aiming to frame you if any regulatory issues arise from the sale." After a brief pause, Cal stood up to pour the coffee again. Returning with 2 cups, he offered one to Franklin. "Prefer cream or sugar?" Franklin replied. "I'll take it black." Cal resumed his seat, settling back comfortably. 1979 is when a memory resurfaces for me, as I was leading First National at the time. My executive vice president, a promising young man named Randall Price, was fresh from Harvard MBA, brimming with innovative thoughts about banking's transformation. As I sipped my coffee, I sensed there was more to share. Randall initiated changes, initially subtle, then bolder, introducing unconventional loan approval methods that bypassed usual checks and setting up exclusive accounts for select customers. I failed to recognize the danger until it was almost too late. He had established a separate set of books, approved loans that should have been rejected, and was receiving illicit payments on the side. What action did you take? Initially, they anticipated I would respond as expected. I got furious, directly challenged him, threatened to unveil his misdeeds. Cal chuckled wistfully, and it seemed he had outmaneuvered me. By the time I recognized his strategic move, he had flipped the board against me, portraying me as an out-of-date elder resistant to essential evolution. The resemblance to Franklin's dilemma was clear. How did you manage it? Initially, not well, Cal confessed. I considered resignation. I spent a week secluded at my lakeside cabin, wallowing in self-pity. He leaned slightly closer. However, I recalled something crucial. Banking isn't about intricate systems or sophisticated financial tools. It's about trust, and trust leaves tracks on paper. Cal rose and approached the bookshelf, pulling out a small photo album. He presented it to Franklin, who opened it to find aged newspaper clippings. "Local banker exposes fraud ring" was one headline Franklin read aloud. The article detailed how Cal Turner had unearthed a scheme involving falsified loan documents and kickbacks. "I returned to fundamentals," Cal clarified. "Employed outdated techniques to trace transactions, pieced together evidence from paperwork, and presented a solid case before involving authorities, saving the bank and my reputation just like Randall did with that newspaper clipping." "You believe I might be capable of doing the same?" Cal returned the album, his expression thoughtful. "I believe you know more about accountancy than your nephew ever will." Cal took a moment, then said, "But Franklin, comprehend what you're confronting. This isn't merely about exposing fraud. It's about standing tall when those you trusted have turned their backs on you. It's about withstanding gossip and internal conflicts." "In the past 7 days, I've lost my business and my marriage," Franklin said softly. "All that's left now is my reputation." Cal nodded solemnly. "Then that's what you defend." He moved towards his workbench again. "Take a look at this." Franklin arrived beside him at the workbench, where Cal picked up a small brass gear. "Observe how these teeth are worn here. If I force this gear to function as is, it will ruin the entire mechanism. I either need to meticulously repair it or replace it with one that perfectly matches the initial specifications." He placed the gear down carefully. Business predicaments are essentially mechanical issues at their core. Identify the damaged gear, the faulty spring, and mend them according to the original blueprint. Franklin grasped the metaphor. "Return to the basics. Precisely. As they say, the records don't deceive. Cal gave him a sharp glance. Do you still possess the original business documents, the physical ones? Some are at the store, but I kept backup copies of the crucial ones. Tax documents, significant purchases, property titles, they're in storage. That's where I would begin. Digital records can be altered. Paper has a knack for safeguarding truth. Cal moved with the deliberate grace of age to his chair. Your father operated an upright business, Franklin, as did you. This lays a foundation upon which any deceit will eventually surface. After conversing for another hour, Cal divulged particulars about how he had meticulously constructed his argument years prior. As Franklin was ready to depart, he felt something unforeseen, a rekindled drive. Thank you, Cal. This conversation proved more beneficial than you realize. Upon reaching the door, Cal stopped him. One last point, Franklin. In my time of turmoil, I erred by allowing pride to prevent me from seeking aid. The older man's gaze was compassionate yet firm. You are not alone in being affected by this situation. Former employees, faithful clients, community members who cherished Wilson's hardware, they too have a stake in the matter. He warned me not to forget. Franklin acknowledged with a nod, taking in the wisdom. I won't. As he returned to his truck, Franklin's thoughts were already shaping a strategy. Not a strategy of vengeance, but of restoration, truth, reputation, and the business values that his family had consistently upheld. The storage unit was filled with the scent of dust and forgotten items. Franklin yanked the chain on the hanging light, exposing stacks of boxes and furniture wrapped in plastic. He moved determinedly to the back corner, where rows of filing cabinets stood like sentinels, safeguarding the past. These were the records his father had kept, and which Franklin continued to maintain even after digitizing the business operations. Tax returns dating as far back as the 1960s, employee records, vendor contracts, property deeds, the entire financial history of Wilson's hardware stored in manila folders and ledger books. Franklin opened drawers briskly, swiftly finding what he needed. Loaded several boxes of records into his truck, together with an item discovered behind filing cabinets, his father's vintage briefcase, Edward J. Wilson, etched on a weathered brass nameplate. Inside the briefcase, he unearthed his father's Mont Blanc fountain pen, a memento from their 25th anniversary bestowed by Franklin's mother. The reservoir still held remnants of old ink, but Franklin knew it could be refurbished. As he shut the storage unit door, the briefcase in his grasp seemed fitting somehow. Antique weapons for a modern war. His father had used this briefcase during the toughest times of the business, when the early 80s recession threatened to close them down. He'd taken it to talks with bankers, vendors, and clients, each time carrying the same message. Wilson's hardware would uphold its obligations, settle its debts, and remain true to its word. In his motel room, Franklin cleared the little table and started arranging records sequentially. He got a fresh ledger book he had bought that morning and unscrewed his father's pen after cleaning it meticulously. On the opening page, in neat handwriting, he wrote, Deception Chronicle. Below this, he listed dates, transactions, and inconsistencies, constructing a timeline of Derek's business manipulation. The task ahead would be tedious and precise, demanding the focus on detail that characterized Franklin's workmanship and entrepreneurship. However, for the first time since the board meeting, he felt the veil of deception lifting, replaced by resolute determination. Cal Turner had shown him a way forward, one preserving the past while acknowledging current circumstances. It wouldn't be simple or swift, but then nothing truly valuable ever is. Night after night, Franklin labored past midnight, the rhythmic scratch of pen on parchment echoing in the silent chamber. Over 5 days, his motel room morphed into an investigator's den, with ledger books and file folders strewn across every available space. The humble coffee maker chugged away ceaselessly, permeating the room with the harsh aroma of budget brew and the occasional acrid whiff from forgotten pauses in its operation. He had merged the 2 twin beds into a larger workstation, yielding sleep only to a sliver at the periphery when fatigue took command. The task was painstaking and laborious. Franklin scrutinized paper documents with precision against digital files copied from Derek's computer, tracking inconsistencies to their roots. The emerging pattern corroborated his apprehensions. For almost 2 years, Derek deceitfully managed the financial records within the custom woodworking division, making it seem unprofitable while secretly stashing its real income in assorted accounts. On the sixth daybreak, Franklin smoothed his tie and traveled to First National Bank. Harold Simmons, a former manager with ties to Franklin's father, had consented to a private meeting. "Thanks for accommodating me, Harold," Franklin began, once they were settled in a small conference room separated from the main area. "I owe you that much," Harold responded, his wire-framed glasses reflecting the fluorescent light. "Your dad provided my son's first job when no one else would employ a 16-year-old with a stutter." He scrutinized the files Franklin had presented. "After this, you asked about the subject before you, and for an hour, Franklin detailed his discoveries, explaining reclassified deals, manipulated inventory values, and delayed custom work payments to alter quarters." Harold listened attentively, occasionally seeking clarification. When Franklin finished, the former banker took off his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose. He stated, "This is clear-cut fraud, Franklin, not mere creative accounting or bold business practices. This goes beyond acceptable boundaries." He put on his glasses and met Franklin's gaze. "What actions do you intend to take with this data?" Franklin replied, "I am compiling a report to present to the board and possibly the County Business Ethics Committee." Harold nodded slowly. "You'll require more than just the trail of documents. You'll need supporting testimonies, individuals with direct knowledge of these transactions." Franklin responded, "I'm focusing on that now." "Sure, I'll give some folks a call," Harold suggested. "There are some individuals at the bank who handle these transactions. They might have spotted any inconsistencies themselves." "I'd be grateful for that," Franklin replied, gathering his papers. "And Harold, let's keep this information private for now. Banking may evolve, but discretion remains timeless." As Franklin exited the bank, he sensed a growing energy. The solo investigation was transforming into something more substantial, a united effort perhaps. Cal Turner had been correct in advising against waging this fight single-handedly. The Bluebird Diner, a town fixture since the 1950s, stood unaltered by time or trends. Franklin settled into a booth towards the rear, acknowledging familiar faces as he walked past. It was evident that news of his retirement had circulated. He could feel scrutinizing gazes on him, assessing for signs of surrender or resentment. Betty, a waitress familiar to Franklin for years at the Bluebird, brought over a coffee. "Black, no frills, just as you prefer," she said, pouring without query. "Thanks, Betty. How's trade? The usual folks have to eat regardless of other shifts." She whispered softly, "Heard about the store incident. Tragic, if I'm honest. Your father would find it distressing." Franklin offered a faint smile in response. "Merely a management shift. It's commonplace in commerce." "Such sudden shifts aren't ordinary," Betty retorted as another customer stepped in. "Your usual breakfast?" she asked, moving away. Tom Peterson, one of the board members who opposed Franklin, arrived at the diner. Hesitant upon seeing him, he eventually approached the booth. "Good day, Franklin," he said, his unease clear. "Tom." Franklin gestured for him to sit opposite. "May I join you?" Tom reluctantly complied. "It seems you might be displeased with me at the moment." To which Franklin responded calmly, "I'm more inquisitive than anything else. We've been friends for 30 years, Tom. You attended my father's funeral. Last year, you dined at my house during Christmas. What led you to believe that Derek's scheme was most beneficial for the business?" Tom fidgeted with a napkin. The figures aligned, Franklin. The projected growth under the revised model, the digital transformation blueprint. He paused, then sighed. "Perhaps I didn't scrutinize things as thoroughly as I should have. Derek is quite persuasive." "Yes, he can be," Franklin agreed. "Did he happen to mention that the plan involves selling Wilson's hardware to Midwest retail within half a year?" Tom looked surprised. "What? No, that wasn't part of the proposal." He spoke about expansion and modernization. Tom looked pale. Not considering selling to a chain that would close the location within 2 years post-acquisition, he asked. Franklin responded quietly, "Yes, I have evidence if it's true." He added, "There's also documentation and financial irregularities that should worry any board member with fiduciary responsibility." Betty returned with Franklin's breakfast eggs, bacon, and toast, placing it down efficiently. "More coffee for you, Tom?" she asked, pouring as he nodded absent-mindedly. His thoughts were preoccupied with Franklin's revelation. The diner doorbell jingled, and Franklin glanced up to see Sarah Jenkins enter. She had been the store's bookkeeper for 15 years before being replaced by a city accountant. "Mr. Wilson," she greeted Tom, spotting him immediately. "I was hoping to find you here." "Sarah, have a seat." Franklin gestured to the booth, and she slid in beside Tom, nodding in greeting. "Overheard from Harold Simmons that you're investigating some inconsistencies at the store," Tom mentioned. "News spreads swiftly," noted Franklin. "Characteristic of small towns," Sarah replied nonchalantly. "I thought it would be beneficial to inform you," Sarah added. "I didn't voluntarily leave last year. Instead, I was compelled to depart after inquiring about the new accounting practices." Tom grew more uneasy. "What kind of questions?" asked Tom. "Inquiries concerning the sudden shift in custom work revenue categorization. Inquiries regarding altered inventory valuations without physical verification. Inquiries about transactions where certain vendor payments were being redirected to fresh accounts," Sarah explained matter-of-factly, yet a hint of pain in her voice was discernible. "I was informed that my concerns were acknowledged, but then I found myself training my successor only a week later." The discussion continued as other frequent customers visited Franklin's booth, among them Jim Davis, who had provided lumber to Wilson's for many years. Mary Ann Tompkins found herself in a community discussion due to her husband's reduced hours at the store, causing worry even for Pastor Roberts, longtime resident. The peaceful breakfast transformed into an unexpected town meeting. Franklin mainly listened, occasionally asking questions, allowing others to voice their concerns about Derek's changes. By the end of his now cold meal, it was evident that Derek's decisions impacted more people than just Franklin himself. As the gathering started to dissipate, Tom remained at the table. "I erred, Franklin," he whispered. "I believe several of us did. Is there anything we can do to rectify the situation?" Pondering his response thoughtfully, Franklin suggested, "A town meeting about Main Street's business development plan is scheduled for next Thursday. Perhaps it's worth attending. It seems beneficial to engage in an open and clear dialogue regarding the current status of Wilson's hardware as part of that discourse," Tom responded, expressing his intention to attend and speak with Bill and others. Meanwhile, Franklin received a section of the local newspaper from Betty, who suggested he take a look at it. The headline read, "Town Meeting, Future of Main Street Business District, set for Thursday, 7 p.m. at Town Hall." Betty mentioned that the whole town has been buzzing about the matter, especially since your nephew has reportedly been discussing redevelopment possibilities with the mayor. Franklin thanked Betty, to which she playfully reminded him not to forget the common people when he ascends to success again. As Franklin exited the diner, Derek entered, nearly bumping into him. Nephew appeared briefly startled, then regained composure with a practiced grin. "Uncle Franklin, I wasn't anticipating your presence here." "Simply having breakfast," Franklin responded calmly. "It's nice to reconnect with old acquaintances." Nephew subtly surveyed past Franklin toward the booth where Tom Peterson was still seated, now accompanied by Bill Jamison, another board member. "So, are these social visits your main activity?" Nephew maintained a cordial tone, but there was a hint of sharpness now. "I would have assumed you'd be relishing retirement, perhaps exploring with Aunt Mara." The reference to Mara was deliberately inciting. Franklin preserved an unchanged facial expression. "Mara and I are taking some time apart. I presume you were already aware of that situation." A glimmer of something, discomfort, worry, briefly flashed across Nephew's countenance before his composed facade reappeared. "Family issues can be intricate. Incidentally, I hope you aren't disrupting Wilson's transition with unwarranted sentimentality. The enterprise progresses, my dear uncle. The council's decision is concluded, you say. Every decision can be reassessed upon discovery of fresh facts, Franklin responded calmly. Derek inched closer, whispering, It seems I must make myself clear. If you have any plans to launch a retaliation, reconsider. I possess evidence that could cast doubt on your financial management over the last few years, doubts that may pique the curiosity of the IRS or the Banking Commission. You refer to the forged documents on the USB drive. Franklin maintained his soft tone. I have the originals, Derek. Authentic records that accurately depict what transpired and when. We can compare them directly if you prefer, perhaps during the town meeting on Thursday. A hint of paleness washed over Derek's face, but he kept his cool. You're playing a risky game for an individual of your age, uncle. Know when to retreat. My father taught me never to retreat when I have a stronger hand, Franklin countered. After being told to enjoy his breakfast, Franklin moved past Derek and headed towards his truck, mindful of glances from within the diner following their brief yet conspicuous altercation. The stakes have escalated subtly. As he fired up the engine, Franklin observed Derek in the diner window, now engrossed in a deep discussion with Tom and Bill. Boundaries were being delineated for what seemed to be an intriguing town meeting. In his motel room, Franklin stood before the mirror, meticulously straightening his tie. He had chosen his finest suit for tonight, the charcoal gray one he wore at both his father's funeral and his daughter's wedding, symbolizing significant events. The town meeting would commence in an hour. On his bed, a leather portfolio containing compiled evidence lay idle. Original documents, comparative analyses, signed statements from former employees and vendors were inside. He had spent the afternoon arranging everything neatly to ensure his presentation was unambiguous and concise. Cal's phone buzzed with a text, Maintain course, truth is on your side. Franklin responded with a thank you and tucked the phone away. Gathering the portfolio and his father's briefcase, he glanced at his reflection in the mirror, noticing signs of the past week's strained lines around his eyes, a weary stance. However, there was also a sense of determination he hadn't felt in years. Tonight's encounter, whatever it might bring, would be faced with the same dignity and integrity that had marked Wilson's hardware for 3 generations. The town hall parking lot was busier than Franklin anticipated, filled with vehicles belonging to current and former employees, loyal customers, and local business owners from Main Street. It seemed the news of tonight's meeting spreading beyond general business development. The half-full meeting room echoed with creaking wooden benches as people adjusted their seating for new arrivals. Franklin acknowledged acquainted faces on his way towards the front rows, where presentations were scheduled. Cal Turner, easily spotted due to his white hair, subtly nodded him encouragement from his seat near the central aisle. As he settled down, Franklin sensed hushed discussions around him, some momentarily pausing as attendees noticed him. Keeping his gaze ahead, he focused on the elevated platform that housed the town council. The polished mahogany podium at its center gleamed under fluorescent lights, displaying the town seal. More individuals trickled in. To maintain an air of calm, Franklin avoided glancing over his shoulder, yet he couldn't help noticing Derek and Mara's arrival, both clad more formally than typical for a town meeting. They settled on opposite ends of the room, Mara's gaze briefly locking with Franklin's before she turned away. Mayor Phillips emerged from a side door accompanied by the town council members, each claiming a spot at the elevated table. The room hushed as the mayor fine-tuned the microphone. Evening, everyone, he began. It seems our interest in Main Street is high, reflecting its significance to our community. His eyes scanned the room, pausing momentarily on Franklin and then Derek. Tonight's agenda encompasses various topics such as business development, zoning matters, and the prospective collaboration with regional retail entities. As the proceedings moved through preliminaries, approvals of minutes, budget reviews, a brief discourse on street repairs near the town square, the mayor eventually arrived at the main topic. Now, concerning the proposed Main Street Business Development Plan, we have several speakers lined up tonight. First off, Mr. Derek Wilson steps forward with assurance, placing his tablet on the platform and connecting it to the projector. In no time, a streamlined PowerPoint display emerges on the screen behind him. "Good evening," he initiates, his articulate tone echoing that of an experienced public speaker. "I'm delighted to share with you tonight our future vision for Wilson's Hardware and, by implication, our Main Street business district." Franklin observes as Derek lays out a plan, seemingly advantageous at first glance. This includes updates to the inventory system, increased online presence, and collaborations with neighboring suppliers. However, the prospect of acquisition by Midwest Retail Development, albeit unstated explicitly, is subtly hinted within his discourse on strategic partnerships and operational harmonies. Derek stated, directing his gaze towards Franklin, "Change can be challenging. It's particularly tough for those used to the status quo, but adaptation is crucial for thriving in today's commercial landscape." Concluding his presentation, approbation filled the room. Franklin observed that it was predominantly from the front rows where Chamber of Commerce members were seated, along with some younger entrepreneurs. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson," the mayor said. "Now we also have Mr. Franklin Wilson, who wishes to discuss certain aspects of this development plan." Calmly, Franklin stood up and moved towards the podium, placing his father's briefcase and portfolio on its surface. The room fell silent. The tension in the air was palpable with anticipation. "Good evening," Franklin started, his voice even despite the butterflies in his stomach. "Previously, I was the third-generation proprietor of Wilson's Hardware, a venture initiated by my grandfather in 1937. He glanced around, noticing mixed expressions, some welcoming, others questioning, a few, including Derek's, outright hostile. "I'm not here to resist progress or update resistance. Any business needs to adapt for longevity," he clarified. "Instead, I wish to delve into the mode of this evolution and whether it aligns with the principles our local businesses were founded upon." Franklin unfurled a portfolio and took out several documents, placing them neatly on the podium. "The vision you heard earlier was an idea. What I aim to disclose are concrete facts, particularly about the ongoing financial management of Wilson's Hardware and the genuine essence of the proposed strategic alliance." For the ensuing quarter hour, Franklin systematically presented his proof, employing the town hall's overhead projector to showcase crucial documents. Franklin outlined the inconsistencies he discovered, the scheme of financial mismanagement, and the concealed intentions to sell to Midwest retail stores. His delivery was calculated and devoid of emotion, concentrating on tangible facts rather than personal issues. After my probe, corroborated by testimonies from ex-employees and banking records, Franklin inferred that the Wilson's Hardware Board had formulated their recent actions based on incomplete and possibly false data. A ripple of surprise swept through the room. Franklin noticed Derek leaning over to whisper something to Mara, his face tense with suppressed anger. "That's a grave allegation, Mr. Wilson," Mayor Phillips said, leaning in. "Do you have evidence to substantiate these assertions?" "I do," Franklin responded, displaying the portfolio. "I have full copies for the council, the current board of Wilson's Hardware, and if required, relevant regulatory bodies." The mayor looked uneasy. "Derek Wilson, do you wish to address these accusations?" Derek stepped back up to the podium, his previously polished demeanor slightly disheveled now. "What has been shared here is the desperate attempt of an individual unwilling to accept sound business decisions. The evidence presented has been selectively chosen and misconstrued. The board reviewed all relevant financial information before reaching their decision." A voice from the audience disputed this claim. Tom Peterson, typically reserved, now spoke with conviction. "As a member of the board, I can attest that we were never provided with the acquisition proposal from Midwest Retail. We were led to believe this was about modernization, not selling the business." Another board member, Bill Jamison, also stood up. "I've examined the documents Franklin provided. They cast doubt on the financial data we received." Derek's composed exterior began to falter. Such intricate business matters should not be discussed in a public setting. "If there are issues, the board can discuss them in private." Came another voice, seemingly dismissive. Sarah Jenkins, previously a bookkeeper, stood toward the room's rear. When she expressed worries about accounting inconsistencies the previous year, she was let go. Mr. Franklin Wilson merely confirmed what some had already suspected. The meeting sparked various discussions among longtime clients and employees regarding the changes at Wilson's Hardware over the past 2 years. Mr. Franklin remained silent, relinquishing control of the conversation. Mayor Phillips endeavored to maintain order by pounding his gavel. "One speaker at a time, please," he urged. "This isn't a trial, but a town meeting." Someone in the audience proposed, "Maybe it should be a trial." The mayor grew visibly uneasy. "Maybe we should postpone this discussion until the accusations can receive thorough scrutiny." Cal Turner's voice, reverberating with authority due to his age and community stature, broke through the din. "This isn't merely a single business issue or domestic spat," he asserted. "Wilson's Hardware, an 80-year-old pillar of Main Street, impacts every business in this room and every local resident who appreciates independent stores over chains. Therefore, it necessitates open and public deliberation." The mayor seemed to be considering his choices, looking from Cal to Franklin to Derek. Finally, he acknowledged Cal's point. "Mr. Turner raises a valid concern. Is the current board of Wilson's Hardware prepared to undertake a comprehensive examination of these allegations before progressing with any ownership shifts or strategic alliances?" The gaze shifted to the board members present, and Tom Peterson broke the silence first. Bill Jameson and the third board member, Mary Hutchins, concurred with the proposition of conducting a review. Derek appeared visibly angry beneath his stoic facade. As CEO, he claimed operational authority, but Tom interjected firmly, suggesting that such power could be suspended during investigation if the board so decided. The council meeting dragged on for an hour before reaching a decision to establish an independent panel to scrutinize the situation and propose recommendations. As attendees started leaving, they approached Franklin, expressing sympathy or airing their own doubts about the store's recent modifications. Cal approached Franklin afterwards, a subtle smirk on his lips. "Impressive performance for a hardware man," he commented. "I had a mentor," Franklin responded, gesturing towards Cal. "The battle isn't over yet," Cal warned. Derek persists relentlessly and retains support from others. However, the facts are now out in the open. People can base their decisions on truth. As Franklin organized his items, he observed Derek scrutinizing him from a distance in the room, his gaze sharp and strategic. Mara stood next to him, her countenance enigmatic. For a brief instant, their gazes interlocked, and Franklin believed he sensed a fleeting emotion in her eyes, not regret per se, but possibly an acknowledgement of what had been sacrificed. Franklin gave them both a slight nod, a conciliatory gesture without animosity, before departing into the crisp evening breeze. The initial phase surpassed his expectations, but this is far from concluded. A week post the town gathering, Franklin found himself in a modest conference room at the First National Bank. Present at the table were Tom Peterson, Bill Jameson, Mary Hutchins, and Harold Simmons, who had consented to offer financial advice to the board's assessment team. On the table, a collection of documents, original ledgers, digital records, supplier declarations, and Midwest Retail's acquisition proposal sat between them. "Let's review what we've established thus far," Harold suggested, adjusting his glasses. Initially, financial records were systematically altered for around 18 months to create an illusion of dwindling profitability in key sectors. Tom nodded, pointing at a spreadsheet, specifically the custom woodworking division, which showed better than expected performance when accurately accounted for. Secondly, Harold continued, the board was provided with inadequate information during their vote on leadership transition. The acquisition proposal had been under advanced negotiation but was not disclosed. Lastly, Bill pointed out, several signatures seemed to have been falsified on regulatory forms and vendor contracts, potentially placing legal responsibility for the company, particularly Franklin, at risk. Mary Hutchins, previously silent on the matter, broke her silence with the question, "So, what's our next step?" Tom suggested. Derek continues as CEO. He's made personnel changes and inventory adjustments beneficial for a swift sale. The board has the power to dismiss him, to which Tom responded, "This could lead to a public scandal and possible legal action, as Derek has indicated he'll sue for wrongful termination." After listening attentively, Franklin interjected, "Perhaps there's another option." He then produced a document from his father's briefcase, stating, "The original company bylaws, penned by my grandfather, contain an unused but still valid provision. If there's a disagreement among family members about the company's direction, an independent evaluation can occur followed by voting from long-term employees, board members, and significant community figures." Harold took the document, reading it intently. This was a stewardship provision in community affairs, common in Depression-era family businesses, but often eliminated during later corporate reorganizations. Yet, this one remains. "It's never been altered or rescinded," Franklin verified, confirming it yesterday through legal channels. "It provides a resolution route that values both the family heritage and the community's business investment." The board members looked at each other, pondering the implications. "This could be less confrontational than a compulsory ousting," Tom suggested, "and more open than a confidential board decision," Mary commented. "The public is already engaged post-town meeting." Bill emphasized that formalizing their voice would benefit Derek, as it would enable him to argue directly. This would prevent any allegations of unfair treatment. Following more deliberation, the board consensually activated the community stewardship provision. Harold was tasked with conducting an independent evaluation, and Tom was assigned to inform Derek of the decision. After the meeting ended, Mary Hutchins stayed behind with Franklin. She confessed, "I owe you an apology," whispering softly. "I supported the leadership change because I truly thought modernization was necessary. I had no idea about the extent of the deception." Franklin responded, "We all strive for what's best for the business. That's what matters now." Mary continued, "Just to clarify, I've known your family for 30 years. Your father provided my husband with his first job upon his return from Vietnam, despite his disability that others refused to accommodate. In the community, Wilson's Hardware has always been more than just a store. This was acknowledged by Franklin with a sentimental nod. That's why it's significant enough to defend." 2 weeks later, a community assessment meeting took place in the high school auditorium, the only suitable space to host everyone who wished to participate. Lining the room were rows of folding chairs facing a long table where Harold Simmons sat alongside several esteemed members chosen as impartial evaluators. Arriving early, Franklin settled in the middle section and greeted acquaintances as they entered former employees, customers, fellow business owners from Main Street. Cal Turner chose to stay several rows behind him, declining a role as an evaluator to prevent any potential bias. Derek made his entrance at the designated hour, escorted by his lawyer and an unfamiliar consultant. Mara's absence was conspicuous, drawing comments after Derek arrived. Harold initiated the gathering, outlining the procedure. "Today, we will listen to proposals regarding Wilson's Hardware's future. Subsequently, individuals qualified according to our company bylaws will vote on the company's leadership and direction. Our task is to uphold fairness and transparency during this process." Derek started the presentations, adopting a less corporate style in favor of more community-oriented dialogue. He conceded misunderstandings about the Midwest retail plan, but emphasized that strategic partnership was the sole feasible course in today's retail climate. "Wilson's Hardware can't thrive independently unless it undergoes substantial modernization and capital investment," he reasoned. "The collaboration with Midwest Retail maintains the Wilson identity while offering means for expansion, yet questions arose regarding the duration of this preservation and the future of traditional services such as custom woodworking and repair." During Franklin's presentation, he stepped up to the podium not with slides or projections, but with a self-made wooden box crafted in his motel room over weeks prior. "This box," he explained, "symbolizes what Wilson's Hardware has always been about. It's made from local oak, using traditional joinery methods, and constructed to endure for generations, instead of merely until the next quarterly report." He placed the box on the podium, revealing its contents, items that cannot be quantified in spreadsheets, like a handwritten note from Mrs. Thank you for promptly fixing Tompkins' flooded basement on Christmas Eve. Pictured is Mr. Gunderson with the custom-built cabinet, a gift for his daughter's wedding. The initial key to the store my grandfather received upon opening in 1937 is also shown. Instead of focusing on financial forecasts or market patterns, Franklin's speech emphasized the business significance within the community and its potential growth while retaining its fundamental values. He presented a comprehensive modernization plan that retained the custom work division and enlarged the widely appreciated educational workshops. Wilson's Hardware, according to him, shouldn't choose between preserving tradition and embracing progress. It should advance its legacy while adapting sensibly to change, just as my grandfather did during the Depression, my father with the arrival of big box stores, and I propose we do now. After the presentations, community members were asked for their input. Individually, they stepped forward to talk about their experiences with Wilson's Hardware, sharing tales of their first birdhouse building workshops on Saturdays, emergency repairs during storms, and helpful advice for new homeowners given by patient explanations. Martin Thompson, who worked at the lumberyard for 22 years, spoke emotionally about how Franklin had kept his full salary during his wife's cancer treatment. Sarah Jenkins went into detail about the accounting changes she noticed before being terminated. Tom Peterson stood up to express his remorse over not thoroughly reviewing Derek's proposals. The room's atmosphere noticeably changed as these testimonials piled up. Derek's supporters, mainly young business owners and Chamber of Commerce members drawn to the economic development aspect, grew increasingly uneasy. After everyone who wished to speak had done so, Harold announced a 30-minute break before the vote. Amidst clusters of conversations, Franklin stayed put, glancing over his papers and refraining from campaign-like behavior. He was taken aback when Derek appeared, occupying the vacant chair next to him. "You've staged quite a spectacle," Derek murmured. "I didn't stage anything," Franklin countered. "I merely ensured everyone had accurate information." Derek fell silent for a brief spell, scrutinizing the wooden case Franklin had carried. "You never grasped my intentions or what I was aiming to achieve, did you? I comprehended your desire to update the business. I even supported some of your proposals. What I didn't fathom was why it necessitated deceit, because you wouldn't have approved of the vital changes." Derek's tone held a hint of exasperation. "You cling too tightly to antiquated practices, too preoccupied with maintaining tradition." "Perhaps," Franklin admitted, "but you never allowed me to contemplate your comprehensive plan." 27 votes were cast in favor of Derek Wilson's proposal, while you perceived me as an impediment and chose to work around rather than with me. Harold called the meeting back to order following your response, and after everyone had voted, he left with the evaluators to count ballots in a separate room. The auditorium filled with hushed discussions during this interval. Franklin remained silent, mentally readying himself for the verdict of the community who had backed Wilson's Hardware for 3 generations. After an interminable 20 minutes, Harold returned carrying a single piece of paper. As he approached the podium, the room fell quiet to listen to his announcement. The results concerning the leadership and direction of Wilson's Hardware are as follows. 119 votes cast in favor of Franklin Wilson's proposal, prompting cheers from many spectators. Franklin, seated, accepted congratulations from those nearby with a humble expression rather than one of victory. Harold called for silence. As per the bylaws, the board of directors will now execute the community's decision. Tom stepped forward to the podium, appearing more confident than ever before. The board acknowledges the community's decisive choice and will swiftly reinstall Franklin Wilson as president of Wilson's Hardware. Additionally, a thorough examination of all contracts and agreements signed during the interim period will be initiated. Turning towards Franklin, Tom asked, "Mr. Wilson, would you care to speak to the assembly?" Confident under everyone's gaze, Franklin walked to the podium. Derek stayed in his seat, his face inscrutable. "I appreciate your faith," Franklin started. "Wilson's Hardware has prospered due to prioritizing community requirements over immediate profit. This won't alter under my management." He paused, weighing his words. "I also wish to admit that change is crucial. Many of Derek's comments about modernization held merit, even if his tactics were not appropriate. In our progression, I pledged to integrate the finest aspects of both ideologies, preserving our heritage while adopting beneficial advancements. Franklin surveyed the room, settling his eyes on Derek. This has been a challenging phase for our clan and our enterprise, but hardship often yields our greatest lessons. I pray we can all advance with knowledge gleaned from this encounter. As the meeting ended and attendees began to leave, the board congregated around Franklin to plan subsequent actions. Derek stayed put as his lawyer conversed earnestly. Uncle Franklin departed from the council and moved towards Derek. "Derek," he murmured, "it's time we discuss the next steps." Derek raised his gaze, his countenance a blend of wrath and acceptance. "What is there to talk about? You've won. The business is yours once more." Franklin shook his head. "This isn't about winning. It's about doing what's best for the business and the community. Some of your proposals have value. I'd like to find a way for you to continue participating, but under appropriate supervision." Derek's eyes narrowed with wariness. "Why would you suggest that after everything? Because we're family, and because despite it all, you possess skills and insights that could profit the business." Franklin maintained his gaze on Derek. "Changes would be necessary from your side, including transparency, accountability to the board, and adopting some traditional values that have kept Wilson's hardware running for 8 decades. This seemed unexpected by Derek, who had anticipated a harsh dismissal. "I will," he replied eventually. "Take as much time as you need," Franklin responded. "The offer remains, but the terms are non-negotiable." As Derek departed with his lawyer, Tom conversed with Franklin. "Are you certain about this, following all that he did?" Franklin pondered Tom's question. "My father always said that a business is truly defined by how it handles errors rather than successes, and the same holds true for family." Tom gave a slow nod in agreement. "Today, you've carried on the Wilson legacy admirably. Your father would undoubtedly be proud. Let's strive to maintain this tomorrow as well, considering the tasks ahead." After observing your generous gesture towards him, Cal Turner approached and commented that not many would extend a second chance after such betrayal. Franklin agreed he wasn't certain about his decision being accepted, but felt it was necessary. Cal praised Franklin's action as wisdom rather than weakness, acknowledging that some might misunderstand the choice. As days passed following the community assessment, Franklin found himself back in his office at Wilson's Hardware. There, he reflected on the lesson, likening its maturation to a fine piece of craftsmanship. Some things cannot be hurried. Franklin spent the morning replacing modern, sleek furniture with pieces steeped in history, such as his father's desk, a worn leather chair, and a credenza filled with family photographs, with Martha's help. Despite her age, Martha's efficiency remained unwavering, and her joy at Franklin's return was evident in her infrequent smile. "The board members have arrived," she announced from the doorway, "and Mr. Turner is among them." "Please, let them enter," Franklin replied, tidying up the desk. The board entered: Tom, Bill, Mary, and Cal, who offered Franklin a reassuring nod. They settled into seats around the compact conference table by the window. "Firstly, I'd like to express my gratitude for your support during these challenging times," Franklin began. "Your readiness to reevaluate the facts and stand up for what's right is something I won't forget." "We are the ones who should be offering apologies," Bill said. "We fell short in our oversight duties." "That's behind us now," Franklin stated decisively. "Discussing the upcoming direction, we must tackle Derek's agreements and determine the ideal leadership structure for our company." The conversation was engaging, at times lively. Cal shared valuable banking insights concerning the contracts with Midwest Retail, which have provisions allowing for easy cancellations. Mary, with her marketing background, proposed strategies to regain community trust and emphasize our return to core values. "Let's address one more point," Tom interjected, referring to his notes. "Have we heard from Derek about your offer?" "No response yet," Franklin admitted. "He has until the week's end." "What if he declines?" Bill inquired. "In that case, we'll bring on another individual to manage our digital operations," Franklin replied. Hopefully, it won't reach that point, was interrupted by a knock on the door. Martha entered looking anxious. Derek is here. He wants to speak with the board. The group exchanged glances before nodding for him to enter. Differently dressed than Franklin had seen in years, Derek wore khakis and a button-down shirt instead of his usual suit. Greeting the board members, he hesitated upon seeing Cal, not expecting his presence. "Thank you for receiving me," Derek started, standing firm. "I've made up my mind regarding Uncle Franklin's offer." Tom responded when Derek paused. "We're listening." Derek gathered himself. "I accept the chance to continue working at Wilson's Hardware under the specified terms. I understand there will be a trial period and closer scrutiny of my actions." The board looked to Franklin, who contemplated his nephew before speaking. Derek appeared altered, less polished and self-assured, showing genuine uncertainty. "Can I inquire about the reasons behind this change?" Franklin questioned. Derek seemed uneasy with the personal tone of the query. "A variety of aspects. Of course, practical issues. Yet, additionally, he looked towards the others first. I've had challenging discussions recently, with Mara choosing to relocate to Chicago, with my father expressing his disapproval of my methods, if not my objectives, and with myself," he added. He slightly straightened his shoulders. "I still feel that Wilson's Hardware should adapt, but I acknowledge that my approach was faulty, harmful even. I'm seeking an opportunity to participate in a more positive manner." Franklin scrutinized Derek's remarks attentively, searching for any signs of manipulation he had noticed earlier. Instead, he observed something unexpected: genuine discomfort, even vulnerability. Franklin stated, "The role would be Director of Digital Strategy." He clarified, "This position would report directly to the board, not to me." Additionally, he mentioned, "For at least 6 months, all financial transactions would need dual approval." Lastly, he emphasized, "You'll have to familiarize yourself with the conventional aspects of the business you've previously disregarded." Derek responded, "I understand," and agreed to the terms. Franklin looked at the board members, who each nodded in agreement. He then said, "Welcome back, Derek," standing up and extending his hand across the desk. He added, "We'll draft the formal contract today." Derek appeared briefly taken aback by the absence of reproach or triumph. He firmly shook Franklin's hand and said, "Thank you for this chance. I'll strive to regain your trust." After leaving to discuss paperwork with Martha, the board members shared contemplative looks. Mary asked, "Are you certain about this, Franklin?" To which he replied, "No," smiling slightly. Important decisions seldom come with certainty. As Derek spoke, Cal gave a nod of approval. Offering reconciliation requires more fortitude than seeking revenge. Not everyone would make the same decision. Franklin admitted, "It isn't entirely selfless. Derek possesses knowledge about modern retail that I lack. If we can utilize his expertise while moderating his approach, the business will benefit." The meeting continued, culminating in plans for the transition. By the time they finished, the afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, casting long shadows on the weathered hardwood floor. As everyone else departed, Cal remained behind. "You've handled these situations ably, Franklin. Your father would be proud." "I hope so," Franklin replied. "There were instances when I doubted I had the resilience to carry on." "Exactly at those moments does strength become crucial," Cal said. "With uncertainty about the future," he indicated towards the office, "returned to its original state. What's your plan now that you've regained control?" Franklin pondered the query. "I will continue the work, but with a fresh outlook, possibly initiating plans for a smooth evolution, ensuring we preserve what's essential while accommodating required transformations." Cal acknowledged this thoughtfully. A bridge instead of a barrier, a sensible strategy. After Cal departed, Franklin stayed in the office as the shop below carried on its operations. He could distinguish the familiar noises, the bell indicating customers, the soft chatter about projects, the occasional whine of the saw in the cutting section, sounds that had become the soundtrack of his life. He pulled out from his desk drawer a pristinely folded white handkerchief, which he had carefully folded on the day of the board meeting. For a brief instant, he examined it, subsequently depositing it into the handmade wooden box he'd meticulously crafted during those weeks at the motel. The box symbolized more than just skill, but also confinement, a space to stow away the agony and deceit, ensuring they wouldn't dictate his future. He closed the lid softly, then positioned the box on a shelf behind his desk, noticeable yet subdued. That night, following the store's closure, Franklin chose not to return to the motel where he was residing. Instead, he strolled to his workshop located behind the store, pushing open a door that had remained undisturbed for weeks. The room greeted him with familiar aromas, lemon oil, wood shavings, and a subtle metallic undertone of tools. He traced his hand along the workbench, reminiscing about completed projects spanning decades. His father had instilled in him, within this very space, teaching him how to operate tools until the actions became instinctive. Franklin unlocked a drawer and retrieved a set of drafting tools. On an untouched piece of paper, he commenced drafting a novel concept, a jewelry box featuring dovetail joints and cherry inlays, a project designed to instruct his grandson Michael in more than merely carpentry skills, imparting technique, patience, precision, and the joy derived from creating an enduring piece. As he delved into his work, the stress of the past few weeks gradually dissipated from his shoulders. This was where he had always found solace, in the meticulous measurements, the accurate cuts, and the revelation of wood's hidden charm under practiced hands. The future would undoubtedly present new trials, absolutely. Restoring faith among customers and colleagues, achieving a harmonious blend of tradition and modernity. Forging a productive partnership with Derek that benefited the business while acknowledging old hurts. But tonight was for renewing his bond with the work itself, the uncomplicated, truthful craftsmanship that had supported his family for 3 generations. After stowing his tools and securing the workshop, a sliver of moon adorned the tranquil nightscape. He paused for a moment in the serene parking lot, gazing at the storefront bearing the familiar emblem, Wilson's Hardware, serving our community since 1937. For the first time in weeks, he didn't merely feel validation or ease, but authentic tranquility. He had battled for something worthy of preservation and charted a path that respected the past while acknowledging the necessity of transformation. It wasn't a flawless solution. Life seldom provided those. But it was truthful, rooted in the principles that had nurtured Wilson's Hardware through depression, war, economic tumult, and now familial deceit. As he navigated back to the motel, Franklin began contemplating his return to the house once shared with Mara. Though it would be different living there solo, it remained a familiar abode, brimming with memories both agonizing and cherished. Like the business, it symbolized persistence amid change, resilience amid loss. Tomorrow presents fresh hurdles, yet tonight, Franklin Wilson found a peaceful slumber after weeks, the burden of doubt departing from his shoulders. Half a year subsequently, on a brisk autumn Saturday, Franklin stood in his home workshop, steering Michael's hands as they maneuvered a wood plane over an oak plank. "Be careful now," Franklin cautioned, sensing the boy's eagerness through their connection. "Allow the tool to perform its task, don't rush it." Michael furrowed his brow in focus, his actions erratic despite Franklin's soothing directions. "This is taking too long. Such is how quality items are created," Franklin countered, layer upon layer, shaving by shaving. He subtly altered the boy's hold. "Attempt again, but this time more slowly. Feel the grain." Michael exhaled and complied, moving the plane more deliberately. This time, the wood peeled off in a flawless, thin strip. The boy's face brightened with astonishment and contentment. "I accomplished it," Franklin acknowledged, moving aside to let his grandson proceed independently. "Carry on in that manner. We want this part polished as flawlessly as glass before we can add the joints." While Michael was engrossed, Franklin enjoyed his coffee, taking quiet pride in the lad's enthusiasm for woodworking. Generally, children of his age preferred video games and sports, but he had been eager to learn since Franklin moved back into the family home 3 months ago. "Grandpa, can't we just use an electric sander?" Michael queried, momentarily halting his work. "One is available in Dad's garage. It would be much quicker." Speed isn't always beneficial, Franklin answered. Manual planing leaves the wood fibers undamaged, unlike tearing them apart. The outcome will have a smoother finish, and you'll learn to read the grain, to cooperate with the wood instead of opposing it. Is that like how you work with Uncle Derek? Michael inquired innocently. Franklin smiled at the unforeseen comparison. A somewhat similar concept. People, much like timber, possess their inherent grain, their individual traits and abilities. It's more productive to align with these than to clash against them. In the months since the community assessment, Wilson's hardware had struck a new balance. Derek, initially reserved and protective, had adapted well into his position as digital strategy director. He demonstrated his worth in crafting the store's online presence and streamlining inventory management systems, while Franklin kept the emphasis on quality, service, and craftsmanship. Their partnership wasn't devoid of tension, but it metamorphosed into something respectful, if not affectionate. Derek was gradually learning the conventional aspects of the business, albeit reluctantly, while Franklin had grown more receptive to digital advancements that complemented, rather than supplanted, personal service. Dad said Uncle Derek came close to wrecking everything, Michael mused, returning to his woodworking. Families can be complex, Franklin acknowledged thoughtfully. People make errors. What truly counts is how we deal with those mistakes, whether we learn from them or perpetuate them. You're asking about Uncle Derek, right? Well, a part of it is because our business benefits from his expertise, just as it does mine. Different generations have distinct abilities. Michael seemed to ponder this as he carried on working. His question caught Franklin off guard. Will Grandma ever return? I didn't realize you were wondering about Mara. She's built a new life in Chicago now. Sometimes people grow apart and move in different directions. Do you miss her? Franklin put down his coffee cup deliberately. I yearn for the person she used to be when we were young. People transform throughout life, sometimes turning into individuals we no longer recognize. This resonated with Michael as he recalled his friend Jake shifting towards a more unsavory crowd, ultimately distancing themselves. Yes, much like that, Franklin sympathized, moved by the young boy's profound insight. They continued their work on the jewelry box for another hour, and Franklin taught Michael the intricate steps of the dovetail joints, the most difficult aspect of the project. This process is time-consuming, Michael grumbled as Franklin demonstrated the use of a marking gauge to create exact lines. Many things worth doing require patience. Rushing only results in having to redo the work or living with the knowledge that it's flawed, like when I hastily completed my science project and received a C. Completely analogous, Franklin agreed, smiling. The distinction between good work and superior work is often unseen by others, but it's always clear to those involved. This embodies the essence of integrity, consistently performing your best, even when not being watched. As Michael started his first dovetail joint, Franklin guided him on the saw, stressing the importance of following marked lines accurately. The key to a flawless dovetail is in the planning, Franklin emphasized. If your measurements and marks are precise, the execution becomes simpler. Just like how you meticulously prepared those documents to expose Uncle Derek's mistakes, Michael remarked, once again demonstrating his knack for relating woodworking lessons to real-life scenarios. Franklin smiled. It appears you pay close attention during grown-up conversations. Dad frequently discusses it. He claims you outmaneuvered Uncle Derek in his own game. It wasn't about triumph or failure, Franklin clarified kindly. Their focus was on truth and what was best for their business and community. They labored till noon, consistently progressing on the jewelry box. Upon tidying up for a break, Michael scrutinized the completed dovetail joint. It looks decent, the lad remarked, gliding his finger over the interlocked wooden parts. Indeed, Franklin concurred, you should be pleased, considering it's your first attempt. Do you know why dovetails have been in use for centuries? Michael responded in negative. Because they become stronger with time, not weaker. The joint secures the pieces together so they can't come apart. Each piece reinforces the other. Franklin traced the joint with his finger. It's one of the strongest ways to join wood without requiring metal fasteners or adhesive. That is why we are crafting Mom's jewelry box this way. Yes, to ensure its longevity and perhaps someday become a family heirloom. Post-lunch, they resumed work in the workshop. Sunlight filtered through the windows, bathing the workbench and tools in a comforting warmth as Franklin observed his grandson trying to independently cut a joint, providing advice sparingly. The boy displayed both his mother's tolerance and grandfather's keen attention to detail. With more practice, he could potentially develop into an excellent craftsman if he continued to nurture his curiosity amidst a world progressively drawn toward digital diversions and immediate rewards. "Grandpa, what's going inside the box you built?" Michael inquired as they worked together. "The one in your office?" Franklin pondered, recalling the wooden box he had made during those challenging weeks now resting on his office shelf. "Mementos, items I wish to preserve but don't require daily viewing. Photos of Grandma, some images and documents, reminders of lessons learned." Michael gave a subtle nod, appearing content with this explanation. "Are you suggesting that the reason for this wooden box tutorial is so I'll remember the lessons?" Franklin grinned at your insight. "In truth, it's more about the bond formed when creating with your hands, a link to all those who crafted before us throughout history. It's like a timeless dialogue, if you will." As the sun dipped lower, Franklin found himself delving into tales of his father and grandfather, recollections of their hardware store beginnings, anecdotes from years of business and life. Michael listened intently, his queries stemming from genuine curiosity rather than mere formality. By day's end, the jewelry box was coming together, pieces fitted and joined, waiting for the lid and inner compartments they'd work on next weekend. "Will it be ready for Mom's birthday?" Michael inquired as they stowed the tools. "Absolutely," Franklin confirmed. "Quality doesn't mean slow, it means attention to detail." Michael nodded, understanding the importance of patience in their project. "What should we place on the box lid?" Michael's mother prefers flowers. "Perhaps we could embed a rose made from contrasting woods," Franklin proposed. "Cherry and oak would complement each other wonderfully. Is it feasible?" "It seems challenging." "We can manage it jointly," Franklin assured him. "That's how knowledge is passed on, lesson by lesson, project by project." As they prepared to leave the workshop, Michael hesitated before exiting. "Grandpa, could I work at the hardware store when I grow older?" The question resonated with Franklin. "If that's your desire, there will always be a space for you, but only if it's your decision. The best work arises from passion, not duty." "I enjoy creating things," Michael replied, "and I appreciate helping people solve problems at the store." "It appears significant." Franklin concurred, placing a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder as they returned toward home, assisting people in constructing and mending what truly matters to them. Such work is always essential. The autumn day was transitioning into twilight, with golden light succumbing to expanding shadows. Franklin gazed at his grandson walking beside him and experienced a deep sense of continuity amidst the numerous alterations and obstacles faced in recent months. Certain aspects had vanished, his marriage, certain beliefs, the straightforward path he once imagined for his later years. Yet, other elements persisted and even thrived: the family-run business, his ties to the community, and most valuable of all, this link to the future strolling beside him, already inquiring about the following weekend's woodworking session. Franklin smiled, feeling a serene tranquility enveloping him, much like the evening embracing the town. The work carried on in various aspects, and it was within this unbroken sequence that a subtle, profound victory was found, surpassing any public validation. "Grandpa," Michael asked upon their arrival at the rear porch, "what happens to the jewelry box once we give it to Mom? Will she keep it forever?" "She'll utilize it as long as it serves her purpose," Franklin answered. "Then, in due time, it may pass on to become someone else's prized possession." That's how handmade items traverse through eras, outliving their creators, linking generations. "Much like the hardware store?" "Indeed, just like that," Franklin said, ushering his grandson into the home's comfort, echoing the same sentiment. The jewelry box was completed on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks hence, its oak surfaces glistening with oil meticulously applied by hand, enhancing the wood's intricate grain. The rosette embellishment adorning the lid, Michael's initial attempt at such intricate work, wasn't flawless, but its minor flaws lent it charm, a testament to youthful hands learning age-old craftsmanship. After Michael left, Franklin remained in his workshop, tracing the dovetailed joints and recalling the expression on his grandson's face when they had finished polishing their final piece. The pride shining from those young eyes reminded him of the sentiment he had felt decades earlier, when his own father had led him through his initial substantial project. He reached for the other box, the one he had crafted during the unsteady days at the motel and now brought home from his office. Upon opening it with care, he examined its contents. A white handkerchief folded just as it had been on the day of the board meeting, a hotel receipt that exposed Mara's deceit, a newspaper clipping announcing the community's decision to reinstate him at Wilson's Hardware, relics from a challenging era that remained preserved yet not forgotten. Franklin placed another item inside, a tiny photo depicting his father standing before the original store, his gaze grave beneath the brim of a fedora hat, his hand on young Franklin's shoulder. He pondered the image for quite some time before shutting it. From his workshop, Franklin observed the late afternoon sun illuminating the maple tree in his garden, its leaves blazing at the edges as autumn progressed, the very same tree he and Mara had planted upon purchasing this house, now towering enough to shade half the yard. Time marched onward, altering everything it encountered, but certain aspects persisted, steadfast, thriving throughout periods of abundance and adversity. The hardware store had overcome its predicament. Derek turned out to be a resource more precious than Franklin had envisioned, introducing genuine advancements while gradually embracing the traditions he'd once disregarded. The relationship between them stayed formal yet progressively respectful, developing slowly into something that could eventually mirror trust. Franklin was contemplating the long-term future, maybe phasing out his role slightly in the coming years, allowing room for fresh leadership, while maintaining the fundamental values of the business unaltered, not retirement per se, but an evolution, a planned, deliberate transition instead of a sudden break. He organized his tools with the meticulous precision that characterized his workmanship and lifestyle. Each tool found its correct home, the workbench was cleaned, the floor swept of wood shavings. Good habits, he was taught by his father, were the cornerstone of quality work. As Franklin readied to depart the workshop, his sight landed on a small piece of oak leftover from the jewelry box project. He grasped it, sensing its weight and potential within his hand, possibly marking another endeavor, another chance to impart skills to his grandson. This, he understood, was what held significance now, not the validation earned or the empire regained, but the knowledge he could impart before time ran out. The quiet inheritance of values displayed, not just stated, honesty, perseverance, expertise, fortitude. The workshop's door squeaked shut as Franklin ventured into the approaching twilight. Crickets initiated their nightly symphony, and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky above. From somewhere along the street echoed the sound of a door slamming shut, a bark from a dog welcoming, the usual sounds of rural life maintaining its steady beat. Franklin paused for a moment on the path between workshop and home, a deep sense of gratitude filling his heart. Not simple joy from youth or contented pride from middle age, but a deeper, more complex emotion and understanding of both joy and sorrow, of achievements and losses, of a life richly experienced. The true measure of a man, his father used to say, isn't in what he constructs, but in how he builds it, and how he acts when the storm destroys his work. Franklin Wilson has endured his tempests. Though rebuilding is still ongoing, perhaps forever unfinished, the foundation remains firm. Each day brings new tasks, each decision a choice. Tomorrow will bring fresh challenges: stock management at the store, a board meeting to strategize for the holiday season, continued maneuvering through changing family dynamics. Tonight, Franklin places the finished jewelry box gently into the house, setting it on the dining table where morning light catches the engraved rose at the perfect angle. His daughter would value not just the present, but the realization that her child was part of its creation, having cultivated the perseverance and finesse required to transform raw wood into a legacy, another rung in the ladder of generations, another pair of hands learning to craft something durable. And it is in this unassuming continuity where the most profound triumph resides.